Hi, it's Wayne Scrabba with Lone Wolf Hot Rods. This is the third in our series on the Slowpoke Nova build. It's a sleeper project, as you know, and this time around we're going to look at the brake lines. I custom cut, bend, and flare the lines myself. It's just a lot easier to build the lines for the application than it is to try and make factory fit lines work. In this application, I also plumbed in the Hearst roll control, as you can see. It's plumbed so that it comes in after the distribution bracket or valve and goes into the crossover line here. As you go down, you can see that there's armor on the line. I include that with my brake line builds. The actual line is 3/16 stainless from Earl's, and the fittings are Earl's Tough. Up top, there's a couple of really difficult bends right here under the roll controller line lock, and that does consume a huge amount of time, and I make a lot of errors. Even though I make templates to build it, it still causes me grief and pain to build brake lines. I guess I do like doing it though. For more, check out the next segment. With that segment, you'll see my pile of mistakes, and you'll also see the tools and little pieces I use to build brake lines for cars. I think you'll find it interesting, and I think you'll get a tip or two on how to make them successfully yourself. Watch for it. If you're wondering why it takes so long to build brake lines, here's a good look at my mistakes. It takes me the better part of a week to do something like I showed you previously. These pieces here are either mistakes or test pieces. It just takes a lot of trial and error to put something like this together. In case you're wondering, I use 3/16 stainless line from Earl's. I also use tube sleeves and tube nuts from Earl's, and I use their Tough right now. You'll see a few blue ones in there. Those were just used for test pieces. I'll eventually cut off the end of this, the flare, so I can reuse these fittings on the mistake. In order to get started on the brake line, here are some of the critical things you need. This is a flexible ruler that my wife's company sells. She sells sewing supplies and quilting supplies, and it's really handy for getting large bends figured out. And as you can see, it's marked in inches, works perfectly. Yeah, just a tape measure or something else you'll need, and I use tape occasionally to nail something down. Need a marker, and probably the most important tool is some real flexible, soft wire that retains its shape, and that way you can make a template for where you're going to go with the brake lines. To cut the line, I simply use one of these. A lot of people will tell you that you can cut the line with a cutoff wheel or cut it with a hacksaw. It just wastes your time. It's just too much trouble. You have too much cleanup. When I do cut the line, however, the next step is to deburr the inside and the outside. I use this tiny flat rat tail file to go on the ID and cleanly deburr it, and on the outside I use a fine flat file to deburr the end of the hard line. You can't use any hard line without this. What this is used for is you have to anneal the tubing. Anytime you cut it with one of these, your tubing is going to work hardened, and it must be annealed. This too is something that was out of my wife's stash from jewelry making. Fabulous little tool. The block of wood is simply scored, and you just run the line in it, and you can anneal it with this. Only takes a few seconds. This stuff will get it red hot, and that's what you have to do. Once it's been annealed, I'll clean the end off. It's just a piece of Scotch-Brite. Next step up that you're going to have to deal with is probably straightening the line. This is a piece that Earl's sells from Brake Quip. It's a pretty decent brake straightening tool. It'll take the big curves out of it, but you can only work larger pieces of material. You can't do a 3 or 4 inch section of tubing with this. If you make a mistake in a 3 or 4 inch section of tubing, you're done. You'll have to cut it off and start again. Flaring the line is another big issue. This is a pro tool that Earl sells from Breakquip. Works really well, but right now I'll give you the heads up on this, and I'm working with them on it. This piece of tooling, this die, I believe is slightly too large, and what's happening, or pardon me, too small, and it doesn't grip the line correctly, and I'm getting a bit of a blister behind or bubble behind the flare. It's probably suitable, but I don't like the cosmetics of it. This tool, on the other hand, is a vintage rigid, I think it's 377 is the part number. Might not look fancy, but this thing gives you reliable flares in 37 degree all the time. I've never really had a problem with it. It does leave a little bit of tooling marks on the side of the tubing, and what I have to do with that is to file it off with a fine file. Once the flare is made, a critical thing that you're going to need is something like this. What that is, it's a lapping tool from Cool Tools. The flare goes in here into this piece, surrounded by this piece. Basically, you lap it. Just a little bit of WD-40 on the cone. Push it in here and you lap the cone. It gets rid of all, it deburrs the ID of the cone, which is otherwise impossible to do. To bend line, I don't have anything really sophisticated. This one's worked for probably 1,000 bends. Imperial Eastman 3/16 inch bending tool. Love it. Works all the time. No problems with it. It's wonderful. One more thing you're probably going to run into when working with line is figuring out how to protect it from damage. You can buy this from Classic Industries and a number of other sources. It's just a spiral wrap that goes over your brake line before you flare both ends. To cut it, I simply use a set of these. And that's it, folks. That's all the fancy tools I use to build brake lines. Thank you. Stay tuned for more videos from Lone Wolf Hot Rods. We're going to continue with our Project Nova, and we'll also present you with some how-to tech videos. There's going to be a 12 bolt rear end video coming up shortly, and it looks at Mark Williams' bad boy 12 bolt rear end housing that he builds for fast street cars. You'll appreciate it. Stay tuned.